$50 doesn't buy much these days. But in this town, it bought a front row seat to a man's humiliation, and nobody in that bar had any idea whose humiliation it was actually going to be. Colton Briggs thought he was buying himself an easy knockout, a local farmer, a heavy bag with a pulse. What he didn't notice were the man's eyes, calm still, like deep water sitting over jagged rocks. Wade Kessler is 38, a wheat farmer and combat veteran from a small county in the Midwest. And this is the night one bad decision at a rundown bar changed the way an entire town looked at him. Grease has a way of working itself so deep into the lines of your fingerprints that no amount of soap ever fully gets it out. Wade stood in his barn under a bare yellow bulb, staring down at his blackened knuckles and the old jagged scar across his left thumb. The air smelled like scorched wiring and dying diesel. His combine had just given up the ghost in the middle of July, with 30 acres of wheat waiting and a storm season closing in. He dragged a rag across his hands. It didn't help. The alternator was fried, melted into a useless lump of copper and iron. A replacement was $500. His checking account had 8A3 in it. His mortgage was due on the 1st, and the wheat didn't care about any of that. He didn't want to go into town. He wanted to sit on his porch with a cheap beer and let the ringing in his ears, a parting gift from a mortar blast outside Ramadi 12 years back, finally go quiet. But wheat doesn't harvest itself, and quiet doesn't pay bills. 30 minutes later, his old pickup rattled onto the gravel lot of the Anvil, a corrugated steel pole barn sitting right on the county line. It wasn't really a tavern. It smelled like stale cigarettes, spilled beer, and nervous sweat. On Friday nights, Duke Malone, a big man whose gut hung over his belt like a sack of wet laundry, pushed the pool tables aside and ran an unofficial fight scene for farmhands, off-duty deputies, and anyone dumb enough to think they had a chin. Wade walked in with his shoulders rolled forward, trying to make his 6-foot frame look smaller, faded work pants stiff with dried mud, a gray shirt stained with engine oil. He ordered a club soda. "You look like hell, Wade," Duke said, sliding the glass across the sticky bar. "Combine died," Wade said, his voice low and rough. "Need cash," Duke laughed, wiping the counter with a rag dirtier than the bar itself. "Ain't gonna find loans in here tonight, just bad decisions." He nodded toward the center of the room. "Unless you're feeling suicidal, there's the open challenge." In the middle of the room, inside a square of taped-together foam mats, stood Colton Briggs. 24 years old, deeply tanned, reeking of body spray, bouncing on his toes and firing crisp jabs into the empty air. He ran a martial arts gym 2 towns over, had 3 amateur belts, a tribal tattoo, and the kind of loud confidence that made Wade's stomach turn, not from fear, but exhaustion. 3 minutes, Colton shouted to the room. "Anybody lasts 3 minutes with me walks away with 500 cash, no gloves, submission, or knockout." Colton wasn't fighting for the money. He was fighting for the rush of watching someone smaller fold. Wade watched him throw a spinning hook kick, technically flawless, and the crowd of mechanics and mill workers oohed right on cue. He looked at Colton's feet, clean, uncalloused, the feet of a man who only ever fought on padded mats with a referee close by. 500, Wade muttered into his glass. "Don't do it," Duke warned, the jovial bartender tone gone. "That kid's broken 2 jaws this month. He's fast and he likes hurting people." Wade closed his eyes. He hated violence. He'd spent his 20s drowning in it, not just committing it, but organizing it, sending young men into compounds that smelled like cordite and fear. He'd spent 8 years since trying to bury that cold, calculating part of himself under manual labor and silence, but the tractor needed an alternator. He set his glass down with a dull thud. "Hold my drink, Duke." The crowd parted in confusion as Wade stepped up to the mats. He didn't vault the rope like a fighter. He lifted one leg over, then the other, like a man stepping over a fence to check on a stray calf. Colton stopped shadowboxing, hands dropping to his hips, a smirk crossing his face as he looked Wade up and down, the muddy boots, the oil-stained shirt. "You lost, old man. I heard 500, Wade said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "You got a death wish, farmer." Colton stepped in close, invading his space, trying to force eye contact. Up close he smelled like spearmint gum and pure adrenaline. "I hit hard. I'm not gonna go easy just 'cause you got dirt on your jeans." Wade bent down and untied his boots, pulled off his socks, and stepped onto the mat's barefoot, pale feet. Thick calluses built from years walking uneven furrows. "Just ring the bell," he said. Duke walked to the edge holding a wad of bills, looking at Wade with something close to pity. 3 minutes. You go limp, you tap, or you don't get up, it's over. Colton raised his taped hands to the room. Easy money. Duke chopped his hand down, and Colton closed the distance instantly, throwing a heavy overhand right meant to end things in 3 seconds. Wade didn't slip it with any grace, he just hunched his shoulders and tucked his chin. The fist cracked against solid bone. Colton stumbled back, shaking his hand, having aimed for the jaw and hit skull instead. Wade felt white light flash behind his eyes, a wave of nausea. It hurt. He was 38, his knees ached, his back was one long knot of pain, and he tasted blood where he'd bitten his cheek. A cold, quiet voice woke up somewhere in the back of his mind, one he hadn't heard since the dusty streets overseas. Stay small, let him work. Watch his hips. Angry now, Colton unloaded, a jab snapping Wade's head back, a low kick slamming into his thigh with a wet, heavy sound that made a woman in the crowd gasp. Wade stumbled, his leg buckling. Come on, dirt boy, Colton spat, smelling blood, and threw a high roundhouse aimed at Wade's temple. Wade didn't block it. He stepped straight into it, closing the distance before the kick could build any real force. Colton's shin slapped harmlessly against his ribs, and with Colton balanced on one leg, Wade simply leaned forward and shoved. Colton crashed backward onto the mats, the air leaving him in one loud grunt. The room went dead silent. Even the jukebox suddenly sounded too loud. Colton scrambled up, face flushing red, the smirk completely gone. He'd just been dumped on his back by a farmer in front of everyone he knew. But this fight was far from over, and the next few seconds were about to change everything the crowd thought they understood about the quiet man on the mats. Wade stood exactly where he'd been, wiping a smear of blood from his mouth with his thumb. He hated the adrenaline running through him. It felt like poison. You're dead, Colton hissed, dropping into a takedown stance. He was going to put the farmer on the ground and finish it there. Wade let out a slow breath and rolled his shoulders. He stopped trying to look small. His stance shifted from tired farmer to something grounded, balanced, and dangerously still. Colton charged, faking a hook and shooting for Wade's waist, expecting a stumble. Instead, Wade shifted diagonally, barely an inch, and Colton dove into empty air. As his head dropped past Wade's hip, Wade didn't throw a punch. He simply gripped the back of Colton's neck and the fabric of his shorts and used the kid's own momentum against him. Colton's face slammed into the floor beneath the thin mat. 2 minutes left, Wade said quietly. Blood dripped from Colton's nose as he pushed himself up, the showmanship gone, replaced by real panic dressed up as rage. He'd never been handled like this. Wade wasn't even breathing hard. Lucky push, Colton snarled, dropping into a tighter guard, and threw a chopping low kick. This time Wade lifted his leg and checked it, bone cracking against bone like a bat against a post. Colton hissed but kept coming, throwing an elbow at Wade's nose. Wade slipped it by an inch, close enough to catch the sharp, sour smell of Colton's fierce sweat. It hit something old in him, the same smell from compounds half a world away, the crunch of glass under boots, the weight of a vest against his chest. For half a second, Wade wasn't in a bar anymore. Colton saw the opening and took it, locking his hands behind Wade's neck in a tight clinch and driving a knee up into his ribs. It connected with a sickening thud. A rib cracked, not clean, but a deep grinding shift that stole his breath and sent white-hot pain through his side. The crowd roared. They smelled blood now. Colton went for a second knee. He never got the chance. The pain didn't make Wade panic. It flipped a switch built over a decade of training. He drove his thumbs into the soft hollow at the base of Colton's throat hard. Colton's hands flew off Wade's neck as his own body screamed to protect his airway. Wade grabbed a fistful of hair, drove a crossface into his jaw, twisted his balance sideways, and swept his leg out. They went down together. Colton tried to scramble into a jiu-jitsu guard, the stuff he taught at his own gym. Wade didn't play along. He just dropped 210 pounds of farm-hardened weight straight onto his chest, mounting him so heavy it felt like concrete falling from the ceiling. Colton tried to bench press him off, a panicked mistake. Wade slid his arms inside, flattened out, ground his stubbled chin into Colton's eye socket, slipped an arm under his neck, and grabbed a handful of shirt on the other side. A choke built for hands and street clothes, not a gym mat. He didn't yank. He just squeezed, slow, steady, like a vice tightening on its own schedule. Colton thrashed underneath him, nails tearing red half-moons into Wade's forearms. Wade didn't even flinch. His breathing stayed slow and even through his nose. 3 seconds, Wade whispered into his ear, not angry, not cruel, just fact. Colton's face went a mottled purple. The thrashing slowed. His eyes started to glaze, and then his hand slapped the mat. Once, twice, 3 times, Wade let go instantly. No fist pump, no glare at the crowd. He rolled off and knelt there, breath catching sharp on his broken rib. Colton rolled onto his side, coughing violently, dragging in huge, ragged breaths, humiliated tears stinging his eyes as oxygen rushed back into his brain. He looked up, expecting a taunt. Wade wasn't even looking at him. He was looking at his boots, sitting neatly at the edge of the mat. He stood, limping badly on his left leg, and sat on a stool to pull his socks and boots back on, laces left loose because bending over hurt too much. The room stayed dead silent. A minute ago these men had wanted blood. Now they were all suddenly very interested in the labels on their beer bottles. It had stopped feeling like a show. It felt too real. Duke walked over, boots thudding on the plywood, and handed Wade 5 crumpled $100 bills. Wade folded them once and pushed them into his pocket. "Christ, Wade," Duke muttered. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" "Just wanted to get back to my truck," Wade said quietly, standing up, favoring his ribs. As he passed the mats, Colton was sitting up, rubbing his throat, his face a mix of shame and shock. He opened his mouth, maybe for a rematch, maybe an insult to save face. Wade stopped and looked down at him, noticing the slight tremble in his jaw. "Keep your chin tucked when you throw that overhand," Wade said, voice like dry gravel, "and tape your wrist tighter. You're gonna break a bone hitting like that." Colton just stared, mouth shut. Wade pushed through the doors into the thick July night, the heat almost a relief after the tension inside. He climbed into his truck. It smelled like stale coffee and dust, and the engine sputtered before finally catching. He sat there a moment, eyes closed, letting the adrenaline drain out and leave nothing behind but ache. His ribs screamed with every breath. His hand was swelling. He pulled the cash from his pocket and looked at it in the dim dashboard light. It wasn't a trophy, it was a transaction. He'd traded pieces of his body and an ugly glimpse into his past for a piece of copper and iron. He pulled out onto the empty highway, the cicadas still screaming in the dark. The next morning the sky looked like bruised iron. A storm was building, threatening to soak the wheat before he could cut it. Wade stood at the counter of Bennett's Auto Supply, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, shifting his weight carefully to avoid the stab in his ribs. "Got it right here," Dale said, hauling a cardboard box onto the counter. "Alternator for your combine. 482 even." He looked up, noticing the bruise blooming across Wade's cheekbone and the stiff way he held his arm. "You take a spill off the tractor." Wade laid 5 crumpled hundreds on the counter. "Something like that. Tripped over a stump in the dark. Gotta watch your step," Dale said, ringing it up and counting out $18 change. "Getting too old to be bouncing off the dirt." "Yeah," Wade muttered, sliding the box against his chest. Too old. An hour later he was back under the bare lights of his own barn, wrestling the new alternator into the engine bay, sweat mixing with grease on his face. Every twist of a wrench grinding his cracked rib. He didn't feel like a man who'd humbled a bully the night before. He just felt like a farmer racing a storm. He tightened the last bolt, snapped the wiring harness into place, wiped his hands on a rag that did nothing but move the grease around, and climbed into the cab. The engine roared to life on the first crank, the gauge on the dash pegged to a healthy charge. The new alternator hummed steady beneath the floor. Wade sat there a moment, listening to it run, looking out at 30 acres of golden wheat swaying in the rising wind. Then he put it in gear and drove out into the field. The work was still waiting. It always was. If this story hit you, the quiet grit, the cost of pride, a man who just wanted to fix his tractor and go home, do me a favor and hit that like button. And share it with someone who'd appreciate a real, grounded story like this one. Make sure you're subscribed for more stories like this, the kind that stay with you. And I want to know, would you have stepped into that ring? Let me know in the comments and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one.